Nice to see you again, and I'm very glad you're still with me. The topic of this lecture is noun style, or with a more grammatical term, the use of nominalizations. After a short explanation, we will turn to several examples that will hopefully convince you of the following. First, nominalizations are indeed very handy and indispensable in science writing. But as with all cool things, too much of it has a bad effect. Critically checking your text for useless nominalizations will do wonders for clarity and crispness. So, let's first turn to the explanation. Let's first acknowledge that the very heart of every sentence is the verb. In every sentence, something happens. The verb, or verbs, plural, express the action in the sentence, like in she runs in the morning or he talks for an hour. These sentences are stated in verb style because the verb itself describes the action, the thing that happens, running, talking. If we use noun style, we take the verb and we turn it into a noun. We might want to do this because, for example, we need to reflect on the act, on the action. We need to talk about it, to view it as a separate entity, or we need to take a more abstract perspective on the action. So we talk about a run, a talk, a debate, a result, a conclusion. We also might want to emphasize the length of the running action or another feature of the action, like in a long run, an interesting talk, an in-depth study, controversial debate. And using these nouns in a sentence, we then often need to add a verb again, which will end up in sentences like he goes for a long run in the morning, or she delivered an interesting talk, or a controversial debate is taking place, or an in-depth study has been carried out. Looking at this table, you see the difference between verb style and noun style, not only in the number of words you need, but also the level of abstraction. In the left column, you see the verbs that are kind of the basis of the noun construction. To conclude, to improve, to test, etc. These are the real actions. When we go to the nominalization, the noun style version, we read to reach a conclusion, to achieve an improvement, to carry out a test. But I think you notice that the emphasis here is much more on the abstract noun part, but we also need a kind of an empty verb to turn it into a verbal expression again, like in carry out a test, or give an explanation, make a comparison. So we end up with an expression that's much more abstract, also wordy, and also changes the emphasis from the verb to the noun. Of course, nominalizations are very handy. The abstract nouns can act as subjects or objects in your sentence, and you can add extra features to make them more specific. Like in these sentences, our in-depth analysis clearly shows now suddenly the abstract noun itself is a subject of the sentence, doing something, showing something. Or addition of the substances resulted in. So the abstract noun itself, coming from the verb to add, now it's the addition, can do something, can result in something. So the actions are packed in nouns, so you can change their function in the sentence. So handy indeed, and science writing is full of abstract nouns and you cannot really miss them all. But a drawback of the use of nominalizations is that an increase of abstract nouns quickly makes your writing less transparent and concrete. Look at this example. Take a minute to read the sentence. Well, clearly, a lot of things are happening in this sentence, but there are hardly any concrete verbs. Can you identify nouns in this sentence that may originally stem from active verbs? Can you find one or two? Abstract sayings for things that in fact are happening. So look again. I think you managed to find some. What do you think of termination, exposure, resolution, increase, improvement, again resolution? All abstract nouns for, in fact, actual happenings, things that happened, actions, or things that happened. Now, when we convert these abstract nouns to verbs, we end up in a sentence like this one. The termination is converted into stopped, the exposure into keeping, resolution resolved, increase to increased, improvement improved, and resolution, again partial resolution, to lessen. So you see in this second sentence, in this transformation sentence, a lot of abstract nouns have been converted into real active verbs, and suddenly the sentence kind of springs to life. You see really things happen. Of course, we also added a human subject, the patient. The patient stopped keeping pigeons. Very important to start the movie here. So now that you've seen what a big difference it can make to resolve nominalizations, to transform noun style, if possible, to verb style, you need to know when or why nominalizations are handy or not. Let's go through some situations in which nominalizations are really useless and situations in which they're really useful. First, when a nominalization follows an empty verb, you should really wake up. Like in an analysis of main effect and interaction was conducted. To conduct is kind of a vague verb. The real action is in the analysis, in the noun. So converting this construction may really help your sentence. And you can end up with, we analyzed main effects and interactions, or main effects and interactions were analyzed. The passive, if you prefer the passive here, which I hope not too often. Second, when you write a sentence that starts out with there is, which is, well, kind of okay, often, of course, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the there is very putting stress on what follows. But in fact, what follows is a noun. There is an increase of. Well, you can harmlessly convert this sentence to pain and restlessness increase. Or in there is an underestimation of, easily to be converted into these effects are underestimated. Much clearer because also it's shorter, but also because the action is in the verb. When nominalizations are linked, you should also wake up a bit and check whether you can convert the sentence to resolve the link of nominalizations, the noun pile, as we also call them. ecosystem destabilization can be the consequence of invasion. So this sentence contains 4 nouns and only the verbs can and be, which are quite model verbs, quite basic verbs, not with a lot of content. So you can also try to pick one of those nouns and convert them into a verb, like in invasion can destabilize ecosystems, or the passive alternative, ecosystems can be destabilized by invasion. So in these 3 situations, be alert and try to find opportunities to change nouns to verbs. It will really blow air into your text, which is a good thing for the reader, so he or she can breathe a bit. Now, useful nominalizations, because you cannot do without them, are the following. First, you remember, I hope, the lecture about cohesion, in which I explained the use of referring nouns. Now, this is a useful nominalization. In sentences where the nominalization refers to something you have described before in the prior text, so the nominalization itself refers or labels the concept that you've been writing about, like in these arguments or this decision. So this is helpful for the reader. You label or point at something you have explained before. A second useful nominalization is when you refer to an action, when the verb that is really the object of the sentence, like, well, first read the second sentence. I do not understand what he intends. So this is an action of the he person, but you want to say something about the thing the thing itself, the abstract concept of the intention. So the intention is the object of the sentence. So in that case, it's handy to use the abstract noun because you can objectify. In fact, nominalization is an act of objectifying, saying something about something as a separate entity. So when you need to objectify the verb, you often need to do that in your article, then the nominalization is a good choice. Response, overload, enlargement, thinning, loss of contractility, installment, all examples of abstract nouns that you cannot do without because they are kind of key terms in your article. And when you try to rephrase them into verb style, you will kind of sound like it will more be like day-to-day language, and your intended readers will not understand you as quickly as when you really use the jargon, in fact. But the jargon is not the right term. It's really about the key terms you are using and that are really important. Well, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or you want me to judge a little part of your text on the level of abstractness, nominalizations, etc., just send me your draft. A small text is also a good idea, so I can try to give you some examples of how to rephrase. So I really like to do that, so don't hesitate to ask for help. Okay, see you in the learning environment.